Hello, hello,
Hello,
and
hello.
I want to welcome everyone to today's Transit Talk. Good afternoon, everyone. To Transit Talk RVA Rapid Transit's webinar series. We are very thankful to have you all here with us today. My name is Faith, Executive Director of RVA Rapid Transit, and as many of you know, RVA Rapid Transit is a nonprofit dedicated to educating and advocating for frequent and far-reaching public transportation in the Richmond region. Our goal is to see more buses go more places, dignified places for people to wait, and elevating the writer's voice. And you're going to hear some of those voices today. To begin, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping details. We are recording today's event, and we will have it up shortly on our website for folks who couldn't be here today, or if you just want to watch it again. To keep down background noise, please do keep yourself on mute during this event, but definitely add any questions or comments as we go along in the chat section. We will have a time for Q&A at the end, and we'll draw from those comments and questions in the chat. Our topic today is North-South Bus Rapid Transit. And before we dive into that topic, I want to bring on Richard Hankins, our new communications and manager. I just butchered his title. But you know what? He's going to introduce himself. Richard, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, well, hello, everybody. I'm Richard Hankins, the official title, Programs and Communications Manager. So if you see a funny meme on our Twitter, that was me, or a relevant article, or some stuff with our writers' voices. So I've been publishing and will publish more of that. Last year, I was a research fellow, so some of the maps from the State of Transit report I did, and then previously I did some similar advocacy work down in Miami-Dade County, but now I'm back in my hometown and really happy to be here.
I think Faith may have stepped away, but
still with us? Are you still with us, Richard?
Yeah. What are you looking for me to do?
Okay, let me just share my screen so I can get you right on up, okay? Give me one moment, guys. Bear with me.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so before we get jumped into the meat and potatoes of today with John and Joe, like I said, I'm the new Programs and Comms Manager. All of our handles are at RVA Rapid Transit, so it'll be Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If you personally see something you want posted, it can be an article, something happening around town, something funny. I would love it. I'm just trying to engage with many people as possible, make it captivating, make it worth your time. On a more serious note, there was a very relevant op-ed to today's talk from Dominion CEO Robert Blue and Better Housing Coalition CEO Greta Harris. I have some quotes on that tomorrow. And then also very exciting, there is more and more talk
manifesting is a separate process.
Board expansion that would have Henrico join in, but from what I'm reading, there is wording in the works to make sure that Richmond or any jurisdiction of the three cannot get necessarily outvoted by the other two, since currently Richmond has the most ridership and bus routes. So I just wanted to extract some of the quote, if you go to the next slide, from the op-ed. And I'll just read the bolded parts, but I think it's all relevant that in Richmond that our underdeveloped transit network is a key barrier that holds our region back from realizing inclusive economic growth, and that the Pulse and redesigned bus network should be seen as our opening act, not our curtain call. I won't take it away from John and Joe too much, but it did feel like a lot of the momentum leading up to the Pulse, that momentum has not necessarily continued since 2018, except for ridership bouncing back, which is very exciting. And then if we go to the next slide, I posted yesterday on Twitter and Facebook, kind of asking people what their thoughts were on a north-south BRT alignment. I am not looking at this as a survey or to advocate for, because southbound, there can be multiple different routes, but it was fun to see everybody's thoughts. Some people wanted on Hull, Chamberlain, Richmond Highway, Midlothian Turnpike. So there's a lot of different ideas, and I like to see the enthusiasm from some of our followers on social media. So I think that's all I have. Right, the writer's voice. So we really think it's important, also in Miami, just seeing it there, you know, sometimes the writers get overlooked. And so I wanted to play 4 different comments from people. I think it's really valuable for folks here to understand what the people are saying who are writing every day. So if you could play the first one, just kind of regarding waiting for the bus.
BRTC were to create a north and south route. On the south side, would you prefer the route on Wall Street, Midlothian Turnpike, or Route 1?
But I'm not saying the bus service over there on the south side, Hull Street, after you have to wait 2 hours to get home in the hot sun, they need to do something. They said they have no bus drivers. All right, I understand that. But if you don't work all day and then you stand and you don't have nowhere to sit, and you stand out there 2 hours waiting for a bus, that's ridiculous.
The second one is on expanding the Pulse South Side.
It makes sense for that line to run on Wall Street, Midlothian, or Route 1. What would be your first? Would it make sense for that line to run on Wall Street, Midlothian, or Route 1? What would be your first?
Wait, that is a good one because all those are busy. All of them are business oriented. So let's say, I think we know overall we have more business, more or less, on Midlothian than, let's say, Jefferson Davis or Hall Street. But there are businesses there too. So it's people with jobs, people that need to get to work. So I guess the demand is just as high, but I think Midlothian would win them out hands down for that route to be,
I just want to give a shout out to, we don't know his name, but that person's enthusiasm. He sounded like a kid in a candy shop, and that's the enthusiasm we're looking for.
So if GRTC created a north-south pulse route on the south side, would you rather be on Hull Street, Midlothian Turnpike, or Route 1?
Hall Street.
Why?
Well, there's 3 buses runs down Hall Street. So I have a chance of getting where I need to go in a short period of time. So that's why I ride Hall Street. That's why.
And one last one that's in 2 separate parts.
CGO Rouse right, and I take the 1A. And it's kind of important now because the job situations is out there. Like I said, Chesterfield has expanded way further than what it was when I was a kid. There was no buses that really go out, sometimes past Midlothian. So it is a time, and it needs to be starting to be changed again, that the bus system run out there. Because I mean, I got people who lives by what you would call it Hankins furniture or something, and they have to get off like blocks down just to be able to get home. So it is important that people, the system go out there now. So thing that people are discussing the fact of why if something is being financed through something, why is that not being provided for the citizens that live there? And that should be one of the main issues of being able to get around public transportation to get back and forth. Because like this, Midlothian, I mean, if you get off of that one stop on 2B or 1A at the where the old Clover used to be at, we done. That's it. If you live any further, you got to go any further. There's no way you're gonna get there. So it's important, and they need to run longer out in that area because they cut them off real early over there. So it's important.
Cool. Does anybody have any thoughts based on any of the comments that were there? You can unmute yourself really quick, or if you just want to throw it in the chat. I just enjoy hearing from different folks, hearing what they have to say. And shout out to Faith, who did, I'm sure you could hear her interviewing as well. She's the one mostly out in the field doing this. So also shout out to Faith.
Well, we can transition on, and maybe folks that have comments later on during our Q&A. But as you can see, those stories and those are very powerful, the impact of expansion and how they can have impact on people's lives. And one of the things I'm excited about, we got a chance to partner with John and Joe when they came down to interview writers. And so some of those interviews that you're hearing, some of those interviews was a part of that partnership, but and also RV Rapid Transit worked on the advisory for this study. So I'm so happy to transition over to John and Joe. So John and Joe, I'm going to please take over. I'm going to stop sharing. You share your screen.
Thank you, Faith, and the entire RVA Rapid Transit team and the collective group that's here today. We're very honored to be able to discuss the study and the opportunity that is before us. I think collectively this group has a huge role and an opportunity to make sure that we continue to see gains and build off the, I would say, national leading success that GRTC's transit system has seen in recent years. So today, John and I are going to go ahead and answer a few questions for folks. Who is the Greater Washington Partnership? What are we doing? Why are we focused on regional mobility and infrastructure, and what are we doing in that space? Then we're going to go ahead and outline the study, the process and its key findings, and then where we see opportunities for the Richmond metro area to continue to grow. For those that aren't aware, we view the region from Baltimore to Richmond, the capital, or the Greater Washington Partnership, is a civic alliance stretching from Baltimore to Richmond, which we define as the capital region. We're working collectively with our board and partners to make the region the best place to live, work, and build a business. And we believe that, for our region to thrive and hit at its peak, we need to make sure that we have an inclusive, growing economy. Collectively, our board and our partners employ more than 300,000 people in the region, and we're committed to the long-term health and success of the region, straddling borders and political cycles. When we launched in December 2016, we're a relatively new organization. When we launched in December 2016, transportation was the first initiative out the gate that the board wanted us to focus on.
The camera's not on.
Because of its unique ability to touch almost every aspect of one's life in terms of an ability for an individual to get to a job, retain a job, keep a job, get to an education, get to a healthcare doctor's appointment. Transportation is really essential. It's the backbone of our region's economy. And so in 2018, after a year of work and conversations with many folks, some of which are on the phone here today, we released a CEO-led blueprint for regional mobility, looking across the surface transportation system on key issues that are important for the region to get right in the next 10 years to make sure that we're continuing to grow and improve our multimodal transportation system. One of the blueprint solutions was to expand rapid transit options throughout the Richmond metro area to better connect residents to jobs and opportunity. So in 2019, after a successful effort in 2018 to launch the Pulse, redesign the city's bus network, and make a historic investment to expand service in Henrico. We partnered with folks to do a study to look at what we called the transit revolution in Richmond. And what we found was that it was wildly successful, right? You run buses where folks want to go, enhance frequencies on key routes, and provide service at more hours of the day. People will respond and use it. Prior to the pandemic, ridership was up leaps and bounds, and GRTC's service today is one of the few in the country that has ridership back up at or exceeding transit ridership levels pre-pandemic. And I think a lot of the work that happened in 2018 is the bedrock for the success that we're seeing at the moment. So we, in many conversations with folks like Faith and others throughout the region, wanted to try to help advance the conversation, and seeing that the bipartisan infrastructure law at the federal level was moving through the process, we wanted to make sure that the region was having, or support the region in having the right conversations to advance the transit system's growth and development. So early last year, we started having preliminary discussions with stakeholders that you see on the screen to start thinking about how do we actually move some of our plans forward. On the left, you see 6 partner organizations who make up our project team, who met regularly throughout 2021 to guide the study. On the right, you see the advisory committee that formally kicked off last June and helped to shape and provide feedback throughout the process on research questions, scopes, recommendations, and ultimately the final report. Throughout the entire process, we had 3 overarching goals. One, we wanted to be additive to the existing work. We didn't want this study to ultimately come in and course correct or divert the region away from the plans that are already on the ground, whether it be the long range transit vision plan or other localized efforts. We wanted to make sure that this was helping push the conversation forward. We wanted to be an accelerant of expansion of the region's successful BRT network. Principally looking in a north-south fashion, connecting Henrico, the city, and Chesterfield. And then throughout this, we wanted to make sure that we're looking at doing this in an inclusive and equitable way, tying the land use patterns and adjacent developments to the transit system and the opportunities that the expanded and enhanced transit line can provide. Which brings us to the report we released at the beginning of January, exploring the north-south BRT alignment. John Hilligus, my partner in crime here at the partnership, is going to go ahead and walk through the report, its findings. He really helped spearhead and mastermind this work. But I want to highlight this op-ed. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend taking a look at it. It was highlighted previously, but Bob and Greta were both informed and informing the process as we went along, and we're very happy to see the final product come out. I think the opportunity before us from a business perspective, from a nonprofit community perspective, is impactful, but it's important that we come to terms just how important transit is to the success of our business community and the people that work there and their families. And I think that they were really excited about the opportunity to place this op-ed in RTD last week, and are ready to lean in and work with all of us to push it to the next level. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to John to pull back the banner and give you guys a full taste of what the study says.
Great, thank you, Joe. And thank you so much to Faith for your partnership throughout this whole entire process. It's been a pleasure working with you throughout this and for inviting us here today. So I am here to talk about this report, Connecting the Richmond Region from East-West to North-South. And I'm just going to start with a little overview of the report. So on the left, you're going to see the geographic scope of our study that we looked at. So we really focused in on these, what I'll call 5 key corridors. starting with the existing east-west pulse line, and then looking at north-south options. And pretty early on in the study process, we realized there was kind of one clear contender on the north side, which is this Route 1 North corridor. So that runs up Belvedere Road and then turns at Azalea Avenue and then continues up north along Brook Road. You know, that may change the exact alignment, but on the south side, there were really these three clear contenders that we kept hearing in conversations with stakeholders. So those are Hull Street, Midlothian Turnpike, and then Route 1 South, or what we call Route 1 South. And Richard was talking about asking the people on Twitter earlier about that. And these were the three candidates we looked at. But I want to start by saying that this study does not say which one we should choose. We are looking at the different existing conditions of all of these corridors. And in fact, you know, we end up recommending that we need more and better transit service on all three of these corridors. GRTC, as the agency responsible for running transit in the Richmond area, you know, they're going to do the official selection of the north-south corridor, but we wanted to provide some background information. And on the right-hand side, you see a quote from a rider voice. And this was something that Faith actually helped with a lot in making sure that we weren't just doing a data scan. We weren't just talking to kind of our advisory committee, but we were also going out there and actually talking to people who are riding the Pulse, riding the other bus lines every single day. So over this summer, we went and actually had a lot of fun going down to Richmond and talking to riders, mostly on Broad Street and then over on Hull Street at the Southside Plaza. And you'll see these peppered throughout the report. And I think this one captures just kind of the sentiment. You know, we need more pulse routes, we need more bus routes, we need more everything. This is the capital city. And it talks a little bit about that enthusiasm. So as I mentioned, you know, we really started looking at the Pulse, which is still relatively new. So it only opened in 2018. And I know that feels like, you know, 3 or 4 decades ago at this point, especially today with a war launching in Ukraine. But 2018 is still relatively new. And so we wanted to go back in time to when the planning first started in 2010 with the Broad Street Rapid Transit Study. And that took about 4 years to complete. And then construction actually began in 2016 with the Pulse opening in 2018. And so we were able to look at data over time to kind of understand what were the impacts of those planning processes, what were the impacts of that construction along the Pulse corridor. And one of the things we also talk about is that, you know, transportation investments can take many years from ideation to completion. So like the Pulse, for example, took about 8. So one of the goals of why we did this study was to accelerate progress, and even if that's just by a year. So we're hopeful that with you here today, we can kind of continue this conversation and move closer to having a new line opening in the Richmond area. So let's start with the Pulse Corridor Plan, which was released by Plan RVA during the construction of the Pulse. And that really outlined 3 goals for communities that were going to live along the new corridor. They wanted to see more compact and mixed communities. They wanted to see more connected communities. And they wanted to see more thriving and equitable communities. And we really thought these 3 goals would be a good way to organize our analysis around a north-south BRT. So that brings me to our 3 recommendation buckets, which I'm going to come back to, but they kind of relate to those 3 goals in the Plan RVA plan. So we want to enhance transit service and build transit supportive multimodal transportation infrastructure. And that's not just for the new Pulse line, but that's also for all 3 of the southern BRT corridor options. We also want to preserve and expand affordable housing and commercial business space. Because that's going to be essential to making sure that we're growing more inclusively over time as we're investing in our transit system. And then we also want to encourage transit supportive land uses and development along the corridor. And we'll get to this in a moment because transit makes the most sense the more people that are there to actually use it. So let me jump in now to the key findings. So I'll start with the east-west Pulse corridor, the existing Pulse corridor. what we found is that essentially the Pulse corridor helped to encourage more housing development, more access to jobs in the rest of the region, higher rates of population growth, more access to jobs via transit. So essentially, it helped create more connected, compact, and mixed communities, which is what we would have expected. So after we looked at the data on the East-West Pulse corridor, we started to look at the data for the North-South corridors, and we looked at the existing conditions along the corridors. And one of the most important indicators of transit readiness or success is the density along the corridor. And that is simply because the more jobs, residents, and destinations along a corridor, the more people are going to use that transit option. So across those 4 corridors, which are Midlothian, Hull, Route 1 South, and Route 1 North, Route 1 North actually had the highest residential and employment densities. But Midlothian Turnpike, and you hear this a lot in the Rider Voices stories, and that's heading into Chesterfield County when you cross, especially when you cross the border of the city, it had actually a lot of job density, which is an interesting finding, but again, confirmed by the Rider Voices. So as I mentioned before, the growth that can accompany transit is often a good thing, but it can also be a challenge, especially for low income or fixed income residents or renters. So we wanted to look at a number of indicators to talk about vulnerability to gentrification and displacement that can accompany the growth that happens again around transit investment. So those include rates of home ownership, average home values, which is the one shown here, median household income. And then when we looked at it across the 4 corridors, we saw that Route 1 South actually had the lowest median household income, as well as the lowest median home values, which indicates, on the upside that they have the most potential for growth, but on the downside, they have the most potential for gentrification and displacement. And that's especially true if the cities and the counties do not have the proper precautions in place. So we'll come back to that when we get to the recommendations. So besides the transit service itself, every trip on a bus starts and ends at a bus stop, where the rider usually has to walk to their destination. So creating accessible transit systems means creating accessible pedestrian environments. And unfortunately, the farther you go from downtown, the less sidewalk infrastructure there is. And so again, we'll come back to this in the recommendations, but this is one of the key recommendations of the report that we're going to focus on. And obviously, when we're talking about equity in this country, we also need to be looking at race and ethnicity along the potential corridors. And when you compare that to, and we try to compare that to the Pulse corridors and the counties as a whole. And so we found that actually in the past decade, while the number of Black residents was kind of increasing across the corridors and the counties, the share of Black residents was actually declining, which is an indicator of neighborhood change or gentrification. And the only places where the share wasn't decreasing was in the counties, which actually mirrors kind of some national trends we've been seeing, where Black residents of Black communities, a lot of them are moving out of city centers and into suburban communities where they may have been denied opportunities in the last century. And I think this is just a curious finding that we think kind of deserves more research, is that of all of the corridor options, the East-West Pulse line actually saw the smallest decline in the share of Black residents, which again warrants more research, but could be tied to more housing, more access to jobs and opportunities along the corridor. When we looked at the share of Hispanic residents, on the other hand, that has grown along all 4 of the corridors, as well as the 3 jurisdictions over the past decade. And today, as many of you probably know, there are large Hispanic communities, especially along Route 1 South and Hull Street corridors, which again is another kind of social benefit that better transit service can bring. This is a really key one that we harp in on of the report, is that one of our recommendations is about encouraging transit supportive land uses and development along the preferred corridor. Again, the more people that are nearby, the more people can use transit. And what we found is that except along kind of certain stretches along Whole Street and Route 1 South that are close to downtown, and actually most of Route 1 North going up at least until Azalea Avenue, the existing residential and employment densities do not meet the national standards for what they recommend for a BRT type investment. So to put it shortly, if you were just looking at employment densities, there are not enough people and jobs there today to warrant that investment. But there's definitely enough people for the express, fixed route bus service, more frequent bus service. And as the region grows, there's going to be even more jobs and opportunities along the corridor. And this is one tool to prepare for and to think about is the connection between land use and transportation. And it should also be mentioned that of the 4 corridors we looked at, only Route 1 South today has regular bus service along the entire length of the corridor. You've probably seen that Midlothian Turnpike has very little to no service along much of the corridor. But thankfully, Chesterfield County has recently started studying transit service and started surveying the community about the potential for transit service along Midlothian Turnpike. So besides all of the benefits of increased mobility, equitable access, or even sustainability, investing in BRT, we know, can generate jobs, wages, and increase the region's gross economic output. So we estimated that the construction of a north-south BRT alone was going to generate between 83 to 96 million in gross economic output and 34 to 39 million in total labor income for the region. So those are no numbers to laugh at, especially considering all of the other benefits that we know transit service provides. So while we did not in this study recommend one corridor or the other for a BRT, we did want to create kind of these handy pages you'll find in the report of summaries of each of the corridors. So what are kind of the key demographics? What are the key characteristics, the destinations, the development opportunities that we know are happening right now? And then we also tried to break down the corridors into specific smaller components, because again, Whole Street closer to the city is very different from Whole Street way out in Chesterfield County. Same with Route North going from downtown to into Henrico County. But we broke out these indicators to kind of show you whether we consider these indicators to be transit ready. So things like density and land use, things like socioeconomic characteristics and pedestrian infrastructure, as well as the existing transit service. And we broke it out into these kind of different categories because we think these, again, are the things that the counties and the city should be focused on thinking about now, because again, we want to plan transportation investments and these other investments together in order to create a more holistic and cohesive environment and make sure that we're doing it and planning for these communities to grow more equitably and inclusively over time. So before I wrap up with going over the recommendations, I just want to leave you with another of these rider voices quotes. A pulse on the south side. I'm all for that. Where do I sign up? Is there a petition? So again, I think that speaks to the energy and passion that a lot of people have of realizing how important transit service is to their lives and how more frequent, better transit service is really a tool to improve quality of life. So I'm not going to go into detail into all 15 of these recommendations, but we did break it out into these buckets. So again, we have the transit and multimodal transportation infrastructure, the affordable housing and commercial business space, and the transit supportive land uses. And these are all really key to make sure that the counties and the city are thinking about now before we start to see the changes that happen when you start building a new transit investment. So I'll just harp on a few of them. Again, we talked about kind of the importance of the safe sidewalk network because every transit strip starts and ends at a sidewalk. These are things that can be happening now and that, you know, the counties and the city can start thinking about along these preferred corridors of how they can build out that sidewalk network. Upgrading bus stops and shelters, you know, we talked about that, and we heard that from some of the rider voices at the beginning. Enhancing transit service and implementing a phased north-south BRT project. This is what we talked about with the employment densities, especially. So we think all of these corridors need more transit service. And in the meantime, as we're focused on creating more frequent service, we can also think about, you know, what is this next expansion of the BRT project. So that's all of the transit and multimodal supportive infrastructure. Affordable housing and commercial business space. We had a lot of great experts on the advisory committee and project team who helped kind of think about what are some of these categories that we need to be thinking about to make sure that these communities become more affordable, more inclusive over time. The first and maybe the most important is just creating goals for affordability and access to frequent transit. I think the Richmond 300 plan has some really great goals around affordability and housing affordability, and some really great goals around access to frequent transit, but hasn't necessarily merged those two into goals for housing affordability nearby frequent transit. So that's kind of one way. You know, we know what gets measured is more, and what gets measured and tracked is more likely to get done, because you have people who can hold the cities and the counties accountable for those goals. Finally, we know that there's a lot of exciting conversations happening in the area around zero fare, or fare free, as some people call it. You know, we don't take a position whether or not that is, but we definitely think that that is a clear tool to whether it's zero fare or other equitable fare strategies to increase transportation equity. And then finally, transit supportive land uses. For transit to work, for transit to function, for it to make economic sense, the more people who live nearby it, the more likely they are to use it, the more jobs that are located nearby it, the more likely they are to use it. And so merging land use planning and transportation planning is just a very essential component, and is something that the cities and counties can get started on now. So I hope you enjoyed kind of learning a little bit more about this report. I'm going to drop a link to the report in the chat if Joe hasn't already. And you can check out the full report, which has a lot more information and context and visuals and graphics about all the data that we looked into. You know, in terms of next steps, we are hoping and hopeful that GRTC will kind of kick off this alignment study later this year. So as I mentioned, you know, we don't talk about where the BRT should actually run, what streets, where it should turn, things like that, whether it should run down Hull or Midlothian or Route 1 North. That is something that GRTC is going to be responsible for planning, for doing extensive community feedback and engagement. We really just wanted to do kind of a background scan to help kickstart this conversation for the region. And we really hope that this presentation, the report, can help jumpstart the discussions among you, among your colleagues and your friends. But it's going to require all of us to kind of keep it moving forward, so that we can accelerate this progress. We can accelerate building this more inclusive economy and this inclusive transportation system that I think everybody on this call wants to see. And so the more kind of focus and attention we can be bringing to this idea, and the more support our leaders can hear. And so we're very heartened to have the business communities supporting this idea, and we hope that you all will help support and continue this conversation as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Faith for any questions and discussion.
Thank you so much, Joe and John. And so what I wanted to do now is open up the chat. If you're comfortable with talking aloud, you can unmute yourself, but we want to give opportunity for you to place your comments, but also place some questions. So I'll open the floor up.
Can I ask a question?
Go right ahead.
Yeah. Hey, John, thank you. John, you know, it continues to mystify me how we expect people to do development along a corridor in hopes that sooner or later someone will put transportation along it. Did you study at all the likelihood or feasibility of development along these corridors, so that if one were to put better transit on them, the corridor would develop? Historically speaking, transportation corridors precede development rather than following it.
That's a great question, and thank you for asking it. I think when we're looking in other parts of the region and around the country, we've seen both. The transportation corridors precede the development and afterwards. So as I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Northern Virginia corridor, the
Check out the orange line, John.
What do you think?
Check out the orange line in Arlington, which completely redeveloped the entire 6 stations.
Yeah. So that is an example of a corridor that transportation investment really drove a lot of development after the fact. And I may have misunderstood your question. Was your question more about whether development
did you do any looking? I mean, no one has done the study yet on what the Pulse did in terms of development along Broad, but my suspicion is it's close to $2 billion at this point for an $80 million investment.
Yes.
And what I'm wondering is, rather than waiting for random investment to create the need for transit, have we actually looked at the likelihood or feasibility of development if we were to develop these corridors with transit?
Got it. Yeah. So we did look at the East-West Pulse corridor, and we did find that more development was happening along the corridor associated with the Pulse corridor construction than the rest of the city, and then the rest of the counties, and that it increased as the construction kicked off. The development activity increased. We did not look at specifically how much. We didn't have the data sources to know how much additional development activity would necessarily happen along the corridor if the transit investment. But when we looked at examples around the country, we do see when you build investment, it increases development activity along the corridor. I got another question in the chat.
I'll just say it's good to see Mr. Campbell any and every time. Thank you.
So Chris in the chat says, building off Ben Campbell's chicken and egg question, what about pop-up BRT as an interim step to permanent infrastructure investment? Fare free is efficiently off-board fare collection. Many of these routes are overly wide with room for bus-only painted lanes.
That's also a great question, and something that we've seen a lot of in Baltimore and DC recently is dedicated bus lanes that are much quicker and cheaper to build and plan than a full BRT system. And yes, you already have currently one of the other benefits of a BRT system of this kind of quick and easy boarding with the fare free. You've eliminated that kind of slow down on all of your bus routes currently, which is great. So there are a lot of interim steps you can do to improve bus service for riders. Dedicated bus lanes, especially along the most congested corridors, the most congested intersections, is something that we've seen again in the DC and Baltimore area be implemented in a matter of months rather than a matter of years, and cost a fraction of what a full BRT project may take.
I'll jump in too. And red paint's great, but frequencies I think matter. Maybe first and foremost as a first step. John made a point that from ideation to implementation, it was an 8-year process for the first pulse line. In that 8 years, hopefully you're not waiting for the construction to happen, right? We can increase frequencies, start to build that ridership. Think about red paint, or Indianapolis has done, you don't have to do red paint everywhere. You can do kind of red paint on the border, save some money. But those roads are wide. Densities may not be fully there to warrant a full BRT everywhere, all the way into the counties, or all the way up north and all the way down south. So we have to be thoughtful about the growth trajectory as well. I'll just also point out, just a few things about what is a benefit in the corridors that we're talking about compared to peers north. The Route 1 BRT that Fairfax is considering is going to cost $730 million, which would be, I don't know if it's the highest, but it would be one of the most expensive BRTs in the country. And that's by and large because the corridor is already congested. And for the DOT to accept, dedicated space, they're going to have to expand the road, right? And that costs money, right-of-way acquisition and building it out. In Richmond, the congestion may not fully exist, and you might already have overbuilt roads. So creatively adapting that right-of-way actually makes for a more feasible, cost-effective kind of BRT dedicated bus right-of-way, as witnessed with the Pulse on Broad, and likely similar type of growth opportunities on the north-south corridor that the region ultimately aligns behind.
I have a question. The one of your slides talked about the thresholds for fixed route, express, and BRT. What is the definition of an express bus? I assume it's not like a commuter bus leaving from a park and ride.
Yeah, it kind of, I think express is there. I think it was from the American Public Transit Association, but I think it's more of a frequent bus. So it might have some of the features of a BRT. It's kind of intermediary between a regular route and a BRT system. So
like the red paint that Chris was talking about, for example, the bus only lane.
I'll have to look up what the exact definition of is, but yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Or just a more frequent bus route.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much.
I will espouse a few thoughts. If anybody wants to ask any other questions, please do. John highlighted one item that I think is really important. I'm going to put into finer context for everybody. The state of Virginia has provided GRTC in the metro area, I believe, a little over $1 million to do the alignment study that we're ultimately hoping that the region does. That alignment study is an important step to get into the hopper for federal dollars if we're going to ultimately do this north-south BRT or any other BRT, right? You've got to have an engineering feasibility type of study that builds the case to get into the process for capital grants at the Federal Transit Administration. So that study is really important. Bob and Greta's op-ed, hit it on the head. We've got 5 years of federal dollars at an elevated rate for transit capital construction. And in that 5 years, we hope that we can identify our preferred alignment and enter that pipeline and secure those capital construction dollars to be able to start moving towards construction. So I think, that's the window that folks should maybe be thinking about. In 5 years' time, we can hopefully estimate that transit capital dollars won't fall off a cliff and it will be non-existent at the federal level. There'll be money. It's no guarantee that it will be elevated like we have today. And so I think raising our hand early in the process in this 5-year window saying, Richmond expects to be in the federal capital construction grant pipeline for a future expansion of our BRT network is going to be important to make sure that Richmond actually gets into the pipeline and gets the money. Because I think, there are many areas of the country that could gobble up all that money from New York to LA to Seattle that have plans that are in flight that they're going to ultimately be moving towards towards that capital construction pipeline, which is a first come, first served type of operation. So a lot of words there. I think what's most important is the first step. We did this study to raise awareness and build excitement in partnership with many folks on the phone here. But I think, the next step is doing the hard work around the alignment study. And fortunately, our good friends from the state saw it in the best interest to allocate resources to the region to support that alignment study. And so we're hopeful that this year we will kick that process off, maybe cross our fingers first half of the year, and we'll get moving. We know GRTC is working hard on it and has been hiring staff to be able to get this thing off the ground. And we will lean in at the Greater Washington Partnership to support the effort. We hope others will as well.
Any other questions before we wrap up here?
I think there's one in the chat.
It's a great question. John, you want to take a stab at it first?
Yeah, so I can read it out for the group. On the topic of multimodal connections, such as sidewalks, building out an incomplete network, what guidance do you have for other multimodal options? So some examples would be Richmond Airport, Staples Mill, bike share, regional bus, and alternate mobility. Yes, we love multimodal infrastructure. I'll turn it over to Joe here to share a little bit about the Capital Region Rail Vision, which is something that we've been working on for a while. We think rail is an immense opportunity for the Richmond area, improving rail connections to the Northeast Corridor, improving rail connections to DC, and Virginia's been doing a lot of great strides in recent years on the rail front. Bus transit itself is only one part of a comprehensive seamless transportation system, a very important part that we hope this report can help bring more attention to, but we definitely need to be focused on all elements of it.
Yeah, two items real quick. One on the rail front. Let's get excited. In the next 10 years, Richmond is going to have hourly train service to Washington Union Station in Northern Virginia, right? That's going to be a game changer in many ways to connect the economies, to connect the jobs, and connect the people. That's an opportunity through the Transforming Rail in Virginia program. If we want to speed that up, if we want to, speed the train so it's no longer a 2 hour, 15-minute track to instead getting it down to 90 minutes, that's going to take people advocating for those types of investments to alter those plans. And, we would like to see that, and we're working with our friends at the state to encourage that. I would also go out and put on folks' radar. I imagine many on this phone or on this call care about the Fall Line Trail. Governor Northam, in his parting budget, allocated hundreds of millions of dollars for trails in the state, including a large investment for the Fall Line Trail. There's an active discussion on this year's budget. One budget, the House would slash the money for trails significantly and likely delay the full construction for the region's Fall Line Trail. The Senate would keep it largely intact. So where that lands at is in the next couple of weeks ultimately dictates maybe the long-term opportunity to get that project done in the next 5 to 10 years instead of the next 10 to 25 years.
Awesome. Well, with that, thank you so much, John and Joe, for coming here today and sharing with us that study. It's amazing to know that in 2010, a study similar to this is what launched the BRT for the East-West corridor. And so I'm excited that we get to be a part of that. We get to be a part of this conversation. And so please, if you're on this call, like Joe said, we have to advocate and push for investment for these particular projects. Please invite Joe or John to share this with your network, or you can even invite RVA Rapid Transit to share stories and concerns and wants from different bus riders around our region. Also, I wanted to make an announcement that RVA Rapid Transit, we are hiring. So we're looking for a campaign organizer, someone to go out into communities and also engage with writers and get these stories and impacts that would be to for any type of expansion in our region, but also connect with businesses and top organizations and leaders on how expansion can benefit them. And then if you know anyone, or if you're interested yourself, you can apply by sending your resume and cover letter to info@rvarapidtransit.org. And so again, take action. We need people advocating on behalf of these different transportation projects, but also reach out to your state and local leaders and encourage them and let them know how important investing in public transportation is and what benefits it has for our region. Ride the bus. Support transit by using transit. You can save on gas, reduce car emissions, but also too, one of the things in our mission is we want to make bus stops dignified places for people to wait. And so we're encouraging people as well as individuals and organizations to adopt bus stops. There is no systematic way in our region to clean and maintain bus stops region-wide. And so what we want to do is advocate for the investment in that, but also until that happens, we're encouraging people to adopt stops. We have a list of stops where you can adopt. We're asking people to do that for 1 year. We're also encouraging businesses to sponsor shelters and benches in the area. Just like Bon Secours did in Church Hill, they invested $250,000 to about 14 stops in the area. Organizations who serve large populations of people who use public transportation, or organizations who employ people who use public transportation, please encourage them to invest in dignified ways that their employees and their clients can get to work. And then also share your stories. We're always looking for stories and concerns from folks that were shared today. Folks can do that by calling 804-286-0007, or you can just leave a comment and fill out on our online survey. Last but not least, support RVA Rapid Transit. Your support enables us to educate and advocate and have transit talks like this monthly. So please donate this tax deductible to our organization. You can do that by sending it to there, or you can visit our website /donate, and then you can use our online way as well. I just want to say thank you so much again to Joe and John for participating in our transit talk today. Be looking out for our next transit talk that's going to take place in March. And I want to say thank you so much and spread the love of transit. Thank you, guys. I'll let you go.
Thank you, Faith.
Hi. Thank you.